A lot has changed in Preludes 13, so whether you're a veteran envoy trying to understand the Virtue rework, or a new player trying Soulframe for the first time, if you look at older videos to learn how things work, some of the systems you see will be out of date. In this video, I'll show you the new mechanics you need to know about and give you some tips on what to prioritize as you play. Let's start right at the beginning, and there's chapters below so you can skip to the parts you need. Soulframe's tutorial quest, called Rise Envoy, will let you test out each of the game's 3 starting loadouts before you make your choice. You can unlock the other options later in the game, but it takes a while now, so make sure you'll be happy with your first choice for at least a few hours of gameplay. You can repeat these trial waves as many times as you like, so take some time to test out your weapon attacks and all 3 of your packed Arcanics, which are these abilities here. If you find that the pact you like most is not paired with the weapon you like most, choose the pact. Even though the other weapons take longer to get now, getting them is still much faster than getting the other pacts. After you choose your pact, the game prompts you to check your loadout here in the back of this tent. This is your Prism, an item that proportionally allocates your virtue points to Courage, Spirit, and Grace, your Envoy's 3 virtues. How many points go into each virtue is determined by which prism you have equipped, but the total number of points you have is still determined by your Envoy rank, which you increase by leveling up new weapons and pacts. You start the game with the prism aligned with your starting pact, but the other starting prisms are very easy to get. After finishing the fable called An Invitation, go to each faction enclave and talk to the faction representative. They won't be there if you haven't finished that fable, so make sure you complete the Torment Stag and then do the intro quest for your starting faction first. All you have to do is talk to the other faction NPCs, and you'll automatically get the starting prism for that faction. These starting prisms will gently favor one of the 3 virtues, extreme prisms that heavily favor one virtue, and hybrid prisms that are split between 2 virtues are currently available to purchase with standing from each of the faction shops, but hopefully this will change soon as acquiring them right now is quite a grind. So, what do your virtues do? Well, a lot actually. There are 4 different types of virtue scaling in Preludes 13: Armor Scaling, Weapon Scaling, Arcanic Scaling, and Envoy Scaling. Armor Scaling is by far the simplest, so let's start there. Each armor piece has 3 defense ratings: Physical, Magic, and Stability. These do about what you'd expect. Physical defense protects you from physical damage, like that dealt by swords or arrows. Magic defense protects you from magic damage, like lightning strikes and some boss attacks. And Stability prevents you from being interrupted or knocked down. Physical and magic armor are both flat damage reductions, and enemies also have armor that will mitigate the damage you deal to them. Each armor piece has a base stat in each of those ratings, plus a bonus stat which scales with the virtues that armor is attuned to. Most armor pieces also have a virtue requirement. If you don't meet that virtue requirement, you will only get the base stats from that armor piece, not any of the bonus stats. Stats with more virtue pips will scale more strongly, meaning they get a bigger bonus from each point you have in that virtue. Those bonuses are pretty meaningful, so you'll almost always want to meet the requirements for the armor you're using. Fortunately, figuring out what to wear is pretty easy in Soulframe. First, look for the virtue pips in the top left corner of your armor icons. Those pips only appear when you meet the virtue requirement for that piece of equipment and its virtue scaling is enabled. Then just try on those different armor pieces and look at this number here, which shows your total armor rating. Pick the armor pieces you have that give you the biggest number and you're good to go. In the future, we might get enough armor pieces that there are pros and cons of wearing different items, or maybe set bonuses that make those choices more interesting, but for now you just want to equip the best armor you've got for the virtues you have. Weapon scaling is pretty similar to armor scaling. You get a weapon's base damage even if you don't meet its virtue requirement, but the extra damage you get from virtue scaling is quite significant, especially as you get more virtue points and better weapons. The pips in the top left corner will show you which weapons have virtue scaling enabled, and if you want more details, I made a whole video about how weapon damage is calculated in Preludes 13. I'll put a link below. Next, let's talk about Arcanic Scaling. Your Arcanics are your 3 packed abilities, and each one is attuned to one of your virtues. Your red ability is attuned to Courage, your green ability is attuned to Spirit, and your blue ability is attuned to Grace. Each Arcanic will get stronger when you have more points in its attuned virtue, although exactly how that scaling works is different for each ability. Every pact is going to need its own video to look at how virtue scaling affects it, but for now just know that every point in a virtue will give you at least some value for that virtue's Arcanic. So, if you have a favorite ability you really enjoy using, you can equip that Virtue Prism to get more out of it. Finally, we have Envoy Scaling, which gets a bit more complicated. Each virtue will boost your Envoy in different ways. Spirit is the most straightforward of these, as it reduces the cooldowns on all of your packed Arcanics, so the more Spirit you have, the more often you can use your packed abilities. Courage sounds pretty simple in that it gives you more life, but actually all virtues grant some life. Courage just gives the most. Spirit gives the least amount of life, and Grace sits somewhere in the middle. That said, the amount of extra life you get from Courage is quite significant, so if you want to play like a tank, go with Courage. The Envoy scaling from Grace is a bit more complicated than the scaling from Spirit and Courage. Grace will give you extra damage on attacks against unalerted or unaware enemies, extra damage on headshots, and a bit of extra virtue scaling for weapons with a natural Grace attunement. I covered this in more depth in my video about weapon damage, but the bottom line for Envoy scaling is that Grace will boost your sneak attacks and your headshots no matter which weapon you choose. So, virtues affect your armor, your weapons, your Arcanics, and your Envoy, and sometimes the scaling overlaps in complementary ways, but sometimes the choice you make on one part of your build will lock you into an option on another part of your build. This whole system is still very new, so we are likely to see some changes over time, but here's a few tips to help you get the most out of what we've got right now. First, if you purchased a Founders Pack and are just starting the game, or if you already started and are thinking of becoming a Wild Founder, choose a Wild Pact that is not the same as your starting pact. This will give you access to a Wild Pact, Wild Prism, and another starting weapon in addition to the starting pact prism and weapon you get through the game's tutorial, essentially doubling your options early on. This won't make a huge difference in the long term because you can get all the starting equipment eventually, but when you're brand new to Soulframe, this can make a big difference. My next tip is to go get those other starting prisms as soon as you can and play around with them. Starting weapons have no virtue requirements, so you'll get at least some virtue scaling with them no matter which prism you equip. Use this opportunity to experiment and see what feels best to you. The differences won't be huge when you don't have many virtue points, but it's still fun to play around with the different options. My next tip is to loot everything you see. Break every crate and barrel, pick up every flower and mushroom, loot every weapon rack, gather everything you can. You're going to want to craft every weapon and pact you can get and level up everything. If you run out of weapon slots, you can buy more with arcs, or you can sell the weapons you don't like after you finish leveling them up. You do want to level everything at least once because that will increase your Envoy rank and thus give you more virtue points. This isn't really new to Preludes 13, and I'm trying to stick to tips that are newly relevant to this update, but having enough virtue points to meet virtue requirements is so important right now that I think this bit bears repeating. Level everything. My next tip is to use your pact upgrades to hit your virtue requirements. If you get a weapon or a piece of armor with a virtue requirement that's too high for you, you can put pact upgrades into that virtue to help you meet the requirement. This is especially useful in early game when you won't have many virtue points and hitting the requirements for new gear will be tough. Another thing that can really help you with virtue requirements is the Triune Talisman. This is a talisman you can craft after defeating the Circade boss 3 times in the Crypt of the Circade and then 3 more times in the Overworld. It gives 3 points to each of the 3 virtues, just like the Paragon Periapt from the Wild Paragon Founders Pack. I'll put a link below to a full guide on the Crypt of the Circade and how to get the Triune Talisman. These fights can be a bit tough if you're still very low level, but if you're struggling, just ask for help in recruiting chat or in one of Soulframe's many community discords. We're a friendly bunch and we love to help out new players. My next tip is to do faction tales. You no longer get these from faction NPCs that show up out in the world. Instead, faction tales are available at each world tree. One side of the tree will have the message board, while the other side will have votives, where you can see which faction tales are available and accept the one you want to do, and soon you'll be able to accept more than one at a time. There are many fragments for weapons and armor that can drop from faction tales, so this is a great way to get better gear, and you'll earn standing which you can use to purchase things like better prisms and recipes for virtue potions. You'll need to complete the Brewer of Hugh's Fable to unlock potion brewing, but once you do, you can purchase a potion recipe once to permanently unlock it with Verminia. As long as you have enough ingredients, you'll be able to craft a potion that gives you 10 points in one virtue, and it lasts for 60 minutes. You only need to be rank 2 to get the recipe, and this can be a huge help early on when you get a new weapon that you really want to use but that has a high virtue requirement. My final tip is to leave feedback in the official Soulframe forums or the official Soulframe Discord. DE is excellent at listening and responding to player feedback, so make sure to let them know what you think. If this video was helpful for you, please help it out with a like and subscribe if you want to see more Soulframe content. If you're an experienced Envoy already, thank you so much for watching. What tips would you give new Envoys? Share them in the comments. And until next time, happy hunting!